The first light of dawn stretched across the plains of Zama, painting the horizon in shades of molten gold and blood red. A low mist clung to the ground, swirling around the feet of soldiers whose breath rose in foggy clouds. The air was thick, a cocktail of dust, sweat, and the faint metallic tang of fear. Somewhere in the distance, the steady clatter of armored hooves and the muted murmur of commanders issuing last-minute orders pierced the silence. It was October of 202 BC, and the fate of civilizations teetered on a knife's edge. How does one prepare for a confrontation that could decide the destiny of the entire Mediterranean world? How does a soldier, a general, or even a civilian reckon with the possibility that by nightfall, empires could crumble or rise? These were not idle questions, for on this plain, two of history's greatest commanders, Publius Cornelius Scipio, the Roman innovator, and Hannibal Barca, the Carthaginian genius, would clash in a battle that would echo through millennia. In the camps scattered across the valley, men sharpened swords, adjusted shields, and murmured prayers to gods both familiar and foreign. Among the Roman legions, veterans of campaigns in Spain and Africa hardened their gaze, recalling long marches, punishing sieges, and the haunting memory of Hannibal's previous victories on Italian soil. For the Carthaginians, elephants trumpeted warily in the distance, their massive forms casting long shadows over the uneven terrain. Hannibal himself moved among his ranks, a figure of calm authority, his eyes like burning coals, scanning the men who had followed him from the mountains of the Alps to the African plains. Yet, beyond the smoke of early campfires, a single question haunted the battlefield. Could Rome finally crush the man who had eluded her for over a decade? Hannibal had arrived on Italian soil when Rome least expected, crossing the Alps with a mix of audacity and audacious luck that had become legend. Battles at Trebia, Lake Trasimene, and Cannae had left Rome bleeding and shaken. Citizens whispered rumors of his brilliance in hushed tones. Soldiers trembled at the very mention of the Barca name. But now the theater had shifted. The Carthaginian army, far from home, faced a Roman force that had learned, adapted, and grown hungrier than ever for vengeance. Scipio Africanus, though younger than Hannibal by a decade, exuded a different kind of magnetism, a magnetic blend of tactical genius, calculated risk-taking, and the quiet confidence of a man who understood his men and his enemy. In the days before the engagement, he had walked the terrain, studied Hannibal's likely formations, and instilled in his officers an unshakable belief that victory was possible. He did not underestimate his opponent, yet he exuded a calm that reassured every soldier under his command. In the villages surrounding the battlefield, life continued in fragile rhythms. Farmers watched from the hills, children clinging to their mothers, while merchants shuttered their stalls and prayed that war would pass them by. Even here the tension was palpable. Every hoofbeat, every trumpet, every shouted order seemed amplified against the fragile backdrop of daily life. Zama was not merely a battlefield. It was a stage upon which the fate of empires would be decided, and the lives of ordinary people would be irrevocably changed. And then there were the elephants. Massive, lumbering war machines that symbolized Carthaginian power, their tusks tipped with iron, eyes wide and wild. They were both awe-inspiring and terrifying, and as they shuffled into formation, the earth seemed to tremble beneath their weight. Hannibal trusted in their shock value to break enemy lines, while Scipio had devised countermeasures, anticipating their impact and plotting to turn Carthaginian strength against itself. From the edge of the plain, the early morning sun glinted off bronze armor, polished helmets, and the steel of countless swords. The scene was deceptively calm. A soldier might have felt the quiet before a storm, a moment suspended between life and the possibility of sudden, violent death. Somewhere a trumpet signaled readiness, a standard was raised, and the whisper of ancient prophecies, both of doom and of glory, seemed to ride the wind. By the time the sun fully climbed, Zama would erupt into chaos, the cries of men and beasts, the clash of iron and the scent of blood mingling with the dust, forever marking the day when Hannibal, the scourge of Rome, would meet Scipio, the architect of his undoing. It was a battle not just for territory, not just for pride, but for the very soul of the Mediterranean world. In this crucible of strategy, courage, and sheer human will, history would be forged. The question lingered, pressing, unrelenting. Who would emerge victorious, and at what cost? The plains held their breath, the armies poised like living statues, and the world waited for the sound that would set history in motion. The first trumpet of battle. Long before the plains of Zama would quake under the fury of battle, the seeds of conflict were sown across the Mediterranean, like smoldering coals ready to ignite. The year was 218 BC, nearly 16 years before the fateful clash that would end the Second Punic War. Rome and Carthage, two rising titans of the ancient world, were locked in a struggle not merely for land, but for dominion, prestige, and the control of vital trade networks stretching from the Italian peninsula to the shores of Iberia and North Africa. The First Punic War had left scars across both civilizations. Rome, once a city-state wary of naval power, had emerged with newfound maritime ambitions. Carthage, the master of trade and seafaring, had been forced to cede Sicily and pay a heavy indemnity. But grudges die slowly, and Hannibal Barca, son of the famed General Hamilcar, carried not only the weight of Carthage's honor, but a personal vendetta. His father's death on the Iberian front had left Hannibal a young man burning with resolve. He would challenge Rome itself, teach them fear, and reclaim Carthaginian prestige. Hannibal's audacious campaign began with the crossing of the Alps in 218 BC, a feat so legendary that it still resonates as a testament to human endurance and military ingenuity. Carthaginian armies, composed of Iberians, Gauls, and Numidians, trudged through snow, ice, and treacherous mountain paths. Soldiers froze, elephants stumbled, and supply lines strained to breaking, yet Hannibal's charisma and tactical brilliance held them together. Each step southward into the Italian heartland was a gamble, a narrative woven from risk, courage, and sheer determination. Meanwhile, Rome reeled. The Republic had survived devastating defeats at Trebia and Lake Trasimene, yet the psychological wound of Cannae, where Hannibal encircled and annihilated nearly 50,000 Roman soldiers, remained raw. Roman society teetered between panic and resolve, questioning whether their centuries-old republic could withstand a general whose name alone struck terror into the hearts of citizens and soldiers alike. The political machinery of Rome adapted swiftly, introducing new consuls, reorganizing legions, and instituting a strategy of attrition, avoid pitched battles, harass Hannibal's supply lines, and slowly choke his forces. Across the sea in Carthage, political tensions simmered. The Senate, wary of prolonged campaigns far from home, debated strategy, sometimes clashing with Hannibal's audacious plans. Carthaginian society relied heavily on trade. Prolonged warfare threatened not just military ambitions, but the very economy of their mercantile empire. Yet Hannibal's victories had inspired loyalty among his troops and awe among enemies, creating a paradox. The man who endangered Carthage's resources had also become its most potent weapon. By 204 BC, the war had shifted. Scipio Africanus, a Roman general whose reputation would soon eclipse even Hannibal's, had emerged as a figure of decisive innovation. Learning from past Roman mistakes, he invaded North Africa, threatening Carthage itself. Scipio understood that to end Hannibal's shadow over Italy, he needed to force the legendary general to defend his homeland. The campaign was bold, audacious, and fraught with peril. A single misstep could see Rome's new hope vanish, consigning the Republic to another decade of attrition and uncertainty. Alliances shaped the battlefield long before troops clashed. Numidian cavalry, under Massinissa, a shrewd and ambitious local king, chose to side with Rome, tipping the balance in mobility and reconnaissance. Carthage's alliances were more tenuous. Elephants and mercenaries could not always replace loyalty born of mutual trust. These dynamics, invisible to many at the time, would dictate the possibilities of victory or disaster at Zama. Civilian life, meanwhile, unfolded under the shadow of this geopolitical chess game. In Carthage, merchants calculated losses, families whispered prayers for absent sons, and envoys carried urgent letters of diplomacy. In Rome, citizens debated war strategy in the forum, while soldiers' families awaited news, their anxieties mirrored by the tension on the front lines. The war was not only about generals or armies, It was about every individual tethered to a destiny shaped by swords, horses, and human ambition. Maps of the era show the expansion of Roman influence across Italy, the Iberian campaigns, and the Carthaginian holdings in North Africa. Visualizing these territories, one can see the stakes clearly. The winner of the confrontation at Zama would control not just lands, but trade routes, economic wealth, and the morale of every city along the Mediterranean coast. This was a war that could redraw the world. Rumors of the impending confrontation spread like wildfire. Soldiers whispered of the genius of Hannibal, of Scipio's cunning, and of the elephants that could trample any infantry line. Civilians speculated about omens, unusual celestial events, strange weather patterns, and reports of prophetic dreams, lending a surreal, almost mythic atmosphere to the approaching clash. The stage was set. Decades of rivalry, ambition, and sheer human endurance had converged, and the plains of Zama would become the crucible where history's trajectory could pivot. In this tense climate, every decision mattered. Every maneuver in the preceding campaigns, every political negotiation, every alliance formed or broken, all pointed to one inevitable collision. Zama was not simply a battle. It was the culmination of years of strategy, genius, and misfortune, a moment where the fates of Rome, Carthage, and the wider Mediterranean world hung in delicate balance, waiting for the first trumpet, the first charge, the first clash that would ignite the fire of destiny. The plains of Zama stretched like a vast canvas, waiting for the strokes of strategy, courage, and chaos that would soon paint them red. In the days before combat, every sound, smell, and movement carried weight. Roman and Carthaginian camps hummed with a strange mix of anxiety and discipline, the meticulous clank of armor being inspected, the distant trumpeting of elephants, and the soft murmur of soldiers recounting past victories and defeats. Scipio Africanus moved with a quiet intensity, walking among his officers in the Roman camp as dawn's first light streaked across the tents. He examined the terrain with a tactical eye honed through years of campaigns in Spain and Italy, noting ridges, depressions, and potential avenues for cavalry maneuvers. His legions were seasoned but aware of the stakes. Each man carried memories of Hannibal's previous triumphs, the encirclement at Cannae still a fresh scar in the Republic's collective consciousness. Scipio spoke in low, measured tones, explaining formations, contingencies, and the role of each cohort. He emphasized discipline over audacity, coordination over individual heroics, yet he inspired confidence, a subtle reminder that victory was within reach, not merely a hope. Meanwhile, Hannibal's camp was a whirlwind of motion and ritual. Elephants stamped their massive feet on the earth, sending tremors through the ground. Carthaginian infantry sharpened swords, polished bronze shields, and recited prayers to Baal Hammon and other gods of war, seeking divine favor. Hannibal walked among his men with an inscrutable expression, noting morale, inspecting units, and personally encouraging officers whose men were less disciplined. Rumors had reached him that Scipio had studied his tactics and sought to counter every traditional maneuver. A tactical mind such as Hannibal's did not simply react. It anticipated, adapted, and sought to exploit even the smallest human or environmental weakness. Both camps undertook extensive reconnaissance. Roman scouts rode out at dawn, skimming the edges of the Carthaginian positions, mapping elephant placements, noting potential flanking routes, and secretly meeting Numidian allies to ensure coordination. Carthaginian riders, expert in local terrain, probed Roman positions, gauging strengths and weaknesses, ready to report back strategies that could turn the tide in the opening moments of engagement. Every observation was a thread woven into a larger tapestry of strategy. Weapons and formations were a spectacle in themselves. Roman legionaries drilled relentlessly, practicing disciplined thrusts, shield walls, and rapid repositioning. The famous triple-line manipular formations were honed to perfection, each cohort moving almost like clockwork at Scipio's command. Hannibal, meanwhile, relied on the shock value of elephants, the mobility of Numidian cavalry, and the deadly coordination of mixed infantry. Combining experienced Carthaginians with mercenaries from across the Mediterranean, each unit had a story, a history of blood and loyalty, adding layers of human emotion to the steel and leather. the psychological component of preparation was equally intense. In Rome, speeches and rituals reinforced courage and unity. Soldiers were reminded of their ancestors' triumphs, the enduring legacy of the Republic, and the consequences of failure. Hannibal, in contrast, leveraged both fear and inspiration. Stories of his previous victories circulated among troops, some of which were exaggerated to a mythic scale, reinforcing loyalty and awe. Leaders on both sides understood that battles are not won by steel alone. Morale, belief, and perception could determine the outcome long before the first clash. Civilian perspectives added another layer to the tension. In nearby villages, smoke from cooking fires mingled with dust kicked up by training troops. Farmers watched silently from ridges, noting the growing armadas of men and beasts, understanding that when armies prepared so meticulously, violence would inevitably follow. Children hid in shadows, clutching to mothers who whispered prayers, while merchants shuttered stalls and counted the cost of delayed trade. The war was not just a clash of armies. It was a collision of worlds, a test of civilization itself. Scipio and Hannibal also contemplated contingency plans. Scipio studied past encounters with Hannibal, from Trebia to Cannae, understanding the Carthaginian genius for encirclement and ambush. He devised countermeasures, flexible formations, gaps in the lines to absorb elephant charges, and the strategic deployment of Numidian cavalry to harass flanks. Hannibal, aware of Scipio's ingenuity, practiced coordinated elephant charges, tested infantry cohesion, and drilled his officers to respond dynamically under pressure. Both men prepared not just to fight, but to outthink the other in a deadly game of human intellect and instinct. As the day of battle approached, tension reached a fever pitch. Camps were alive with anticipation, yet there was a surreal quiet between bursts of activity. Moments when soldiers stared across the plains, imagining the first clash, the first scream, the first fall. Zama itself seemed to hold its breath, the earth readying for impact. The preparation was more than logistics and drills. It was a ritual of fate, an intimate dance of fear, hope, and resolve that would culminate in one of history's most decisive battles. And as the sun dipped low, casting elongated shadows across both camps, Scipio and Hannibal each surveyed their men, sensing the invisible threads of destiny pulling tighter. Soon the plains would erupt, every strategy tested, every man's courage measured. The first trumpet would pierce the air, and history itself would tremble at the might of Zama. The morning of Zama broke under a pale, hesitant sun, casting long shadows across the dusty plains. The Roman legions and Carthaginian forces faced each other, stretched in formations as precise as they were deadly. Roman maniples flexed like coiled springs, shields polished to reflect sunlight, while Hannibal's elephants loomed in lines, iron-tipped tusks glinting, their breath fogging in the crisp air. For a moment, the world seemed suspended between heartbeats. Every soldier, every horse, every elephant caught in the fragile calm before chaos. The first phase began with Hannibal's war elephants. A thunderous tremor rolled across the plain as the beasts charged, horns bared, the ground quivering beneath their weight. Roman soldiers braced, forming the tested anti-elephant wedges Scipio had drilled into them. The elephants collided with the first Roman lines, some panicking and veering off course, their enormous bodies trampling friend and foe alike. Dust, screams, and the metallic scent of blood filled the air. Cavalry units flanked the elephants, harassing them from the sides, guiding some to panic into the Carthaginian ranks themselves, a brilliant exploitation of Hannibal's own force against him. As the elephant assault faltered, Hannibal's infantry surged forward. His mixed forces of Carthaginian citizens, mercenaries, and Numidian allies pressed the Roman lines, seeking gaps, testing the cohesion of Scipio's maniples. The Romans held firm. Discipline, drilled over countless hours, allowed each man to rotate fresh cohorts into the front line, absorb pressure, and maintain formation. Shouts of command rose above. The din, metal clashed against metal, and the plains became a living canvas of strategy and survival. Numidian cavalry, light and agile, skirmished relentlessly. On the Roman side, Massinissa's Numidian allies countered with uncanny precision, harrying Carthaginian flanks and cutting off retreat paths. Small detachments darted like shadows, arrows whistling through the air, striking both men and beast, feeding panic into Hannibal's less disciplined units. The psychological toll was immense. Soldiers stumbled under fear, elephants screamed, and commanders shouted frantic orders amidst the chaos. By mid-morning, the battle reached its turning point. Scipio, anticipating Hannibal's layered tactics, had deliberately held reserves. The Roman manipular formations now pivoted with fluid precision, exploiting gaps created by the failed elephant charge and the overstretched Carthaginian infantry. Heavy infantry pressed from the front, while cavalry enveloped flanks, isolating segments of Hannibal's forces. Each maneuver was a deadly dance. One misstep meant death, yet the Romans moved with coordinated grace, a testament to Scipio's genius. Hannibal recognized the danger. He rode along the lines, his presence a beacon of courage, urging troops to hold, to counter, to strike decisively. Some units regained composure, but the combined pressure of disciplined Roman infantry and relentless cavalry gradually eroded cohesion. Panic spread quietly, invisibly at first, then visibly. Soldiers hesitated, elephants faltered, and gaps widened. Hannibal's once feared envelopment tactics, the same that had destroyed Rome at Cannae, were now neutralized by anticipation, preparation, and superior maneuverability. The battle's sensory details are almost overwhelming. Dust clouds rose like choking walls, mixed with smoke from torches ignited to disrupt lines. The metallic clang of swords, the dull thud of shields, and the guttural cries of men and animals created a living symphony of war. Blood ran across the dry plains, soaking into the soil that would, in time, bear witness to the turning of an empire's fate. Amidst the chaos, acts of heroism and desperation unfolded. A Roman centurion, shield chipped and sword streaked with blood, rallied a faltering cohort, holding a critical position long enough for reinforcements to arrive. On the Carthaginian side, a veteran mercenary led a countercharge, cutting through the Roman front before finally succumbing to overwhelming numbers. Individual bravery met the machinery of strategy in a brutal interplay, human lives woven into the vast tapestry of war. By late afternoon, the cumulative pressure broke Hannibal's formations. Numidian cavalry, coordinated with Roman flanking movements, sealed escape routes. Elephants, once terrifying instruments of war, were either neutralized or fled, leaving their handlers exposed. The Carthaginian line, once a formidable wall of men and beasts, began to collapse in pockets, creating chaos that spread contagiously. Hannibal attempted to rally his generals, reposition units, and restore order, but the battlefield had shifted irreversibly. The Romans, seizing momentum, pressed relentlessly. Scipio's manipular formations, combined with disciplined reserves and cavalry superiority, enveloped the remaining Carthaginian forces. Soldiers fought with grim determination, aware that every advance could be decisive. By sunset, Hannibal's army was shattered, retreating toward the relative safety of Carthage's fortifications. The plains of Zama, once a stage for strategic genius on both sides, now lay scattered with the remnants of men, horses, and elephants, a visceral testament to the cost of war. The immediate aftermath of battle was a scene of both triumph and horror. Roman soldiers, exhausted and bloodied, tended to the wounded, secured prisoners, and began consolidating control over the field. Carthaginian survivors fled in disarray, their morale shattered, their legendary commander forced to reckon with the reality of defeat. The victory at Zama was not merely a tactical triumph, it was the culmination of years of preparation, observation, and daring. The moment where Scipio Africanus cemented his place in history as the man who finally outmaneuvered Hannibal. The human element, however, was as vivid as the strategic. Soldiers wept for comrades, officers mourned mistakes, and the dust-laden air carried a mixture of relief, grief, and the lingering scent of blood. Civilians who had observed from a distance could barely comprehend the scale, the brutality, and the significance of what they had witnessed. Zama was not just a Roman victory, it was a pivotal moment in the struggle between civilizations, a defining clash that would shape the Mediterranean for generations. As dusk settled over the plains of Zama, the echoes of battle gradually gave way to an eerie, haunting quiet. The once living tableau of men, horses, and elephants now lay strewn across the terrain, a tapestry of carnage that whispered both triumph and tragedy. Roman legions, bloodied but disciplined, moved cautiously among the remnants, securing prisoners, tending the wounded, and counting the staggering cost of victory. The ground itself seemed to mourn, dust mingling with blood, hoofprints frozen in the soft earth like a permanent testament to the clash that had reshaped history. Casualties were immense on both sides. Estimates suggest that Hannibal's army suffered tens of thousands of losses, many slain outright, others captured or scattered in chaotic retreat. Elephants, once symbols of Carthaginian terror, were dead or gone, their massive bodies broken and still. Roman forces also bore the scars of combat, though their disciplined formations had mitigated total collapse. Yet numbers alone cannot convey the human toll. The cries of the wounded, the groans of survivors, and the quiet despair of soldiers sifting through the bodies of friends and foes alike painted a more vivid, painful picture. Hannibal himself, though victorious in spirit for his survival and leadership, was visibly shaken. Riding among the remnants of his forces, he attempted to restore order, issuing terse commands to regroup scattered units. The weight of defeat was not lost on him. Years of daring campaigns, audacious strategies, and brilliant victories culminated in this single, irrevocable moment. The Carthaginian general's genius had been tested against the ingenuity of Scipio Africanus, and the verdict was stark. Rome had adapted, learned, and overcome. Scipio, by contrast, moved through his troops with a calm authority that belied the exhaustion of both men and animals. He surveyed the field, noting the bravery of soldiers, the effectiveness of strategic maneuvers, and the gaps that could have been exploited by a more ruthless or luckier opponent. His victory was tactical and psychological. He had broken the myth of Hannibal's invincibility, inspiring Roman soldiers and citizens alike, while shattering the morale of Carthage's army. Even amidst exhaustion, he took careful note of lessons learned, preparing for the political and military ramifications that would follow. Prisoner management was a critical task. Thousands of Carthaginian soldiers surrendered or were captured, their fates varying from integration into Roman labor units to ransom negotiations. Civilians who had accompanied the armies, camp followers, merchants, and families, were left to navigate the ruins of camps, often scavenging for food, water, and safety. The human drama extended beyond the battlefield. Zama's impact rippled into households, trade routes, and local economies across North Africa. Territorial control immediately shifted. With Carthaginian forces retreating, the Roman presence in the region solidified, laying the groundwork for negotiations that would eventually conclude the Second Punic War. Hannibal's defeat forced Carthage into a defensive posture, limiting its capacity to project power and effectively ending its expansionist ambitions. Rome, by contrast, emerged not only victorious on the battlefield but also strategically dominant, asserting influence over territories, allies, and trade networks across the Mediterranean. The psychological toll on both sides was profound. Roman soldiers, though triumphant, had faced the terrifying specter of Hannibal's elephants, relentless cavalry, and expert infantry coordination. They had witnessed friends fall, felt the earth tremble beneath charging beasts, and survived a battlefield designed to crush morale. Carthaginian soldiers, many of whom had marched across mountains and fought in campaigns spanning years, confronted the crushing reality of failure, the collapse of once feared formations, and the realization that their homeland might now be vulnerable. Civilians observing from nearby hills and settlements were left in awe, fear, and grief. Farmers returned to flattened fields. Children stared at the horizon where smoke and dust mingled, and merchants counted losses, both material and human. The clash at Zama was not merely a military event. It was a cataclysm that shaped the social and emotional landscape of the region. As night fell, the battlefield quieted, leaving only the faint groans of the wounded and the occasional shout of a sentry. Fires burned where temporary camps had been, sending smoke curling into the darkening sky. Leaders on both sides reflected on the day. Scipio prepared for the political and strategic consolidation of victory, while Hannibal contemplated the next moves in a campaign that had reached its most devastating turning point. The immediate aftermath of Zama was not just about who had fallen or survived. It was about the end of an era and the dawn of Roman supremacy across the Mediterranean. The dust of Zama settled, but its echoes reverberated across the Mediterranean for decades. Hannibal's defeat was more than a military loss. It marked the end of Carthage's expansionist ambitions and the irreversible rise of Rome as the dominant Mediterranean power. Rome's victory reshaped not only political boundaries but also the balance of wealth, influence, and strategic thinking across the ancient world. In Carthage, the immediate shock rippled through the political elite. Hannibal's brilliant strategies had failed to secure victory, and the Senate, once divided, now faced the grim reality of negotiating peace under Roman terms. Economic constraints followed swiftly. Heavy indemnities were imposed, warships were surrendered, and Carthage's freedom to wage war without Roman consent was curtailed. The city, once a mercantile powerhouse capable of projecting influence across the Western Mediterranean, now had to rebuild under the watchful eyes of a humbled but vigilant Rome. For Rome, the victory at Zama was transformative. Scipio Africanus, elevated to legendary status, became a symbol of military ingenuity and calculated audacity. The Republic had proven that it could learn from past defeats, adapt its strategies, and confront even the most formidable generals. This shift in perception boosted morale among Roman citizens and soldiers alike, reinforcing the Republic's political cohesion and fostering confidence in its expanding territorial ambitions. Rome's dominance over trade networks in the Western Mediterranean solidified, while its political authority extended into regions that had previously resisted Roman control. Strategically, the lessons of Zama resonated through military thinking for generations. The battle demonstrated the importance of adaptation, anticipation, and disciplined flexibility. Scipio's careful study of Hannibal's tactics, combined with his ability to integrate cavalry, infantry, and psychological warfare, set a precedent for future campaigns. Military scholars would later cite Zama as an example of how preparation, innovation, and moral cohesion can overcome even the most fearsome battlefield legend. Conversely, Hannibal's defeat underscored the limitations of tactical genius when isolated from strategic and logistical support, an enduring lesson in the interplay between audacity and sustainability in warfare. Socially and culturally, the aftermath of Zama affected populations far beyond the battlefield. In Carthage, the loss intensified internal political tensions, influencing generations of citizens to prioritize stability over expansion. Rome, conversely, basked in a newfound prestige that fueled further colonization, military recruitment, and public works. Stories of Scipio's victory spread across the Republic, inspiring not just soldiers but poets, historians, and civic leaders. Embedding Zama deeply into the cultural memory of Roman society, economic effects were equally profound. Rome's control over previously contested trade routes allowed the Republic to prosper, consolidating wealth that funded further campaigns and the expansion of infrastructure, such as roads and ports. Carthage, meanwhile, faced a prolonged period of economic restraint, limiting its ability to recover quickly and forcing reliance on diplomacy and cautious regional defense. The very flow of goods, grain, metals, luxury items shifted along Roman-controlled channels, subtly but powerfully reinforcing the Republic's strategic advantage. Yet the long-term impact of Zama extended beyond politics and economics. Hannibal himself remained a figure of enduring fascination and fear. Though defeated, his legend influenced military theory, inspiring commanders and generals for centuries. His tactics, particularly his use of mixed forces and psychological manipulation, were studied and adapted by later strategists, reminding the world that even in defeat, genius leaves an indelible mark. What if scenarios lingered in both contemporary thought and later historiography? What if Hannibal had received reinforcements from Carthage? What if Scipio had misjudged the terrain, or the elephant charge had succeeded in breaking the Roman lines? Each question underscores the fragile balance of history. A single moment, a single decision, could have altered the fate of civilizations. Instead, the actual outcome, a decisive Roman victory, established a new paradigm, ensuring that Rome would dominate not only the Western Mediterranean, but also shape the trajectory of European history for centuries to come. Visually, one can imagine the transformation. Former Carthaginian strongholds would eventually be rebuilt under Roman oversight. Trade routes realigned to favor Roman ports. Monuments erected to commemorate Roman valor. Maps of the post-Zama Mediterranean reveal a world increasingly under Roman influence, where political boundaries reflected military dominance, economic priorities, and the cultural ascendancy of a state forged in blood and strategy. In military and political theory, Zama became a touchstone for leadership, foresight, and adaptability. Leaders studied the importance of understanding both the enemy and one's own forces, balancing aggression with prudence. The battle underscored that technology, terrain, and numbers matter, but so too do morale, training, and the strategic integration of diverse forces. Lessons from Zama would echo through history, informing campaigns from Julius Caesar to Napoleon, and even into modern military thought. Ultimately, the long-term impact of Zama was the reshaping of the Mediterranean world. Rome's supremacy was no longer contested. Carthage's ability to project power was diminished, and the cultural, political, and economic ripple effects would define the region for generations. Zama was a lesson writ large: decisive leadership, careful preparation, and the courage to confront history itself could change the world forever. The plains of Zama, once littered with the remnants of men and beasts, have long since returned to silence, yet their story reverberates across centuries. The battle was decisive not merely for the outcome of the Second Punic War, but for the trajectory of the Mediterranean world itself. In that one brutal day, Scipio Africanus outmaneuvered Hannibal, demonstrating the power of preparation, discipline, and strategic foresight. Rome had emerged not only victorious, but irrevocably dominant, setting a precedent for what a well-led and adaptable military could achieve. From Zama, enduring lessons in leadership emerge. First, the integration of strategy and tactics proves essential. Scipio's meticulous study of Hannibal's previous campaigns, combined with flexible battlefield maneuvers and the effective use of cavalry and infantry, illustrates the importance of understanding both the enemy and the environment. Leaders cannot rely solely on courage or audacity. They must anticipate, adapt, and orchestrate their forces with precision. Hannibal's genius, though extraordinary, could not overcome the cumulative preparation and insight of his opponent. Morale and human psychology, too, are central to victory. Soldiers fight not only with weapons, but with belief, confidence, and cohesion. Roman troops, disciplined and motivated, with a clear understanding of their role in the larger strategy, maintained cohesion under pressure. Hannibal's forces, though experienced and brave, were increasingly strained by fatigue, logistical challenges, and the failure of elephants and mercenaries to turn the tide. The battlefield is as much a contest of human will as of military engineering. Another key lesson lies in adaptability. Scipio transformed perceived weaknesses into strengths. The threat of the elephant charge, once a terror on Italian soil, was mitigated by innovative formations and flexible countermeasures. Rome had learned from previous defeats, turning past failures into insight that secured victory. In contrast, Hannibal's reliance on traditional tactics, while brilliant in the past, proved insufficient against a commander who had studied him meticulously and prepared for every contingency. The societal implications of Zama are equally profound. The battle demonstrated that the rise and fall of civilizations is shaped not only by ambition, but by strategic foresight, resilience, and political cohesion. Rome's victory secured its influence over trade, wealth, and alliances, paving the way for centuries of dominance. Carthage, once a mercantile powerhouse, was forced to restrain its military ambitions and rebuild under the shadow of Roman oversight. In this, history reveals the delicate interplay between battlefield outcomes and broader societal structures. Zama also invites reflection on contingency, the what-ifs that haunt every historian. What if Hannibal's elephants had broken the Roman lines? What if Scipio had misjudged timing or terrain? These moments remind us that history is never predetermined. It is shaped by decisions, preparation, and human ingenuity in the crucible of chance and consequence. The battle is a timeless study in how leadership, adaptability, and courage can shape events far beyond a single day. In contemporary terms, the lessons of Zama extend beyond the military sphere. Leadership under pressure, the integration of strategic planning with tactical execution, and the moral cohesion of teams are relevant in politics, business, and any context where high stakes demand decisive action. Scipio's victory demonstrates the enduring principle: preparation, understanding of strengths and weaknesses, and the ability to adapt to dynamic circumstances are crucial for success in any field. Finally, Zama leaves a dramatic human lesson. Courage and brilliance alone do not guarantee triumph. Success demands coordination, resilience, and the wisdom to learn from both past failures and present circumstances. The day Hannibal met Scipio on Zama was a turning point, not just in a war, but in the history of civilizations. It reminds us that the decisions of leaders, the discipline of soldiers, and the resilience of societies can collectively shape the fate of the world. As the sun sets over the plains of Zama, the battlefield fades into memory, but its lessons endure. For those who study it, the echoes are clear. History favors the prepared, rewards adaptability, and honors courage wedded to wisdom. In the clash of titans, Rome rose, Carthage humbled, and the Mediterranean world was forever altered. The story of Zama is a testament to the power of human will, strategic insight, and the profound impact of a single decisive battle.